He was a man of no title, no noble birth, yet his words would survive for centuries. Domingo Paes came not to conquer, not to rule, but to trade, and in doing so he left behind one of the most vivid descriptions of the Vijayanagara Empire ever written. Portugal in the early 1500s was a nation of restless sailors and daring merchants. From the Cape of Good Hope to the Arabian Sea, their ships carried not just goods, but the dream of empire. Vasco da Gama's discovery brought Europe face to face with India. Albuquerque's conquest of Goa gave Portugal its first stronghold on the eastern seas. Now men like Paes followed, not to fight, but to profit. Lisbon's harbor was the beating heart of empire. Every voyage began with prayers, tears, and the smell of tar and salt. On those wooden ships, men gambled with their lives for gold and glory. To Domingo Paes, this was not adventure. It was business. The journey to India was among the most dangerous on earth. Ships faced hunger, disease, storms, and enemies at sea. The sea gave riches, but it also demanded lives. For sailors, the Cape was no Cape of Hope, but the graveyard of ships. Here, Portugal gambled with the ocean, and often lost. Portugal's empire was built with cannon and courage. Every voyage risked a clash, and every clash could end in fire and drowning. Months without fresh food turned men into shadows. Gums bled, bones weakened, skin turned pale. The sea punished those who dared cross it. This was the cost of empire, lives lost at sea, fortunes gained on land. Men like Domingo Paes risked everything for the hope of gold and glory. Goa was the heart of Portugal's empire in India. Churches rose beside mosques, Indian merchants bargained with Europeans, and Arabian horses waited for buyers. For Domingo Paes, Goa was only the beginning. In Goa, Domingo Paes first heard whispers of a kingdom inland, a city of towering walls, endless markets, and riches beyond imagination, Vijayanagara. With guides and guards, Paes prepared for the dangerous journey inland. Ahead lay weeks of travel through forests, rivers, and dusty plains. What awaited him was uncertain, but the promise of wealth made the risk worth it. The road from Goa to Vijayanagara was no smooth path. Traders crossed dense forests, climbed rocky hills, and forded swift rivers. Nature tested every step. Bandits haunted the roads, preying on travelers. Yet foreign merchants, especially those carrying horses, were rarely harmed. Even thieves understood that such goods were too valuable to destroy. Leaving the forests behind, Paes entered vast plains. Dust rose with every hoofbeat, rivers cut across the land, and villages dotted the horizon. Each day brought him closer to Vijayanagara. After weeks of hardship, the first signs of the empire appeared. Roads widened, villages grew larger, and the presence of soldiers was felt. Paes had entered the heartland of Vijayanagara. And then, on the horizon, the city itself appeared. 7 great walls, each larger than the last, rising from the earth like mountains. This was Vijayanagara, the city of victory. The gates of Vijayanagara opened to reveal a world alive with power and abundance. Elephants in procession, wide streets filled with traders, and soldiers standing guard. This was an empire at its height. Inside the city, Paes found markets overflowing, temples rising like mountains, and streets wide enough for 10 horsemen to ride abreast. It was a place of order, not chaos. Each quarter had its purpose, each trade its own space. For Paes, business came first. The Arabian horses he had brought were priceless to the rulers of Vijayanagara, who built their power on cavalry. But beyond trade, Paes found something greater, a city where nations met, where faiths coexisted, and where wealth and beauty flowed like a river. Vijayanagara was not only a capital, it was the beating heart of an empire. Within the walls, Domingo Paes entered a city alive with abundance. Wide streets stretched as far as the eye could see, lined with shops and stalls. Each market had its own order, each trade its place. Here was no chaos, but discipline and design. One street glittered with gems. Rubies, diamonds, emeralds, and pearls were laid out as if the very earth had emptied its treasures into the city. Another quarter brimmed with spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom. The very air was rich with fragrance, as if the winds carried Arabia and China together into one city. In yet another street, silks from distant lands and cottons from Indian looms dazzled the eye. Fabrics embroidered with gold, dyed in brilliant reds, blues, and greens, created a sea of color. But the true heart of trade lay with horses. Arabian steeds, brought across seas, stood in proud display. To Vijayanagara's rulers, these animals were worth their weight in gold. In Vijayanagara, the world itself had gathered. Arabs, Persians, and Portuguese stood side by side with Indian merchants. Even Chinese traders brought porcelain and silk. The city was not merely Indian, it was global. Paes marveled not only at wealth, but at order. Vast tanks, aqueducts, and canals carried water through the city. He saw 15 to 20,000 men at work, as if an army had been raised not for war but for life. This was the best provided city in the world. Rice, wheat, pulses, and fruits of every kind were abundant and cheap. No man went hungry in Vijayanagara. Towering temples rose like mountains, their walls carved with gods and heroes, their courtyards filled with chanting priests, dancers, and flowers. Religion was alive in every corner of the city. And then the greatest spectacle of all, the Mahanavami festival. Here the empire displayed its glory. Thousands gathered in joy and devotion. Soldiers marched, musicians played, and elephants draped in gold paraded through the streets. At the heart of it all stood Krishnadevaraya, the emperor of Vijayanagara. Strong in war, wise in peace, he ruled with justice and power. Under him the empire reached its greatest glory. Behind the markets and temples stood the empire's true strength, its army. Cavalry, elephants, and infantry combined into a force that commanded respect across the land. Vijayanagara was not only a kingdom of land, but also of sea. Its power stretched to the western coast, where ports flourished under imperial protection: Amkola, Mirjayo, Honor, Batekala, and Mangalore. In Vijayanagara, the world converged. Arabs, Persians, Chinese, and Portuguese mingled with local traders. This was more than trade. It was an exchange of ideas, languages, and faiths. What struck Paes most was not just wealth, but order. Taxes were fair, trade was protected, and laws enforced. Unlike many kingdoms where fear ruled, here merchants prospered under justice. Vijayanagara was a city built not only for glory, but for survival. Its tanks, canals, and reservoirs stretched across the land, feeding crops and people alike. Here, abundance flowed from palace to hut, from nobles to commoners, all shared in the city's plenty. Music, dance, and festivals filled the streets. Vijayanagara was more than stone and trade. It was alive. Domingo Paes wrote not as a noble or ambassador, but as a merchant. Yet his words became a mirror of history, preserving Vijayanagara's glory for centuries to come. Centuries later, Vijayanagara lies in ruins. Its walls are broken, its palaces silent. Yet through Paes's words, the city still breathes, a memory of an empire unmatched. Through the eyes of Domingo Paes, we glimpse an empire that once ruled the heart of South India. A city of markets, temples, armies, and festivals. A city of wealth and order. A city that, though fallen, still lives, in stone, in memory, and in history. In Vijayanagara, beauty was not limited to palaces and temples. Artisans filled the city with color and design. Music was the soul of the city. Every festival, every street echoed with sound. Temple courtyards became stages where devotion met art. The empire's kitchens offered endless variety, simple meals for the poor, feasts for the nobles. Beyond the great city lay villages, the backbone of the empire. Fertile land and clever irrigation made Vijayanagara self-sufficient. Trade connected city to countryside. Caravans carried goods across the empire. Wide roads linked the capital to ports and villages. Bridges crossed rivers, making travel easier. Vijayanagara was also a seat of knowledge. Scholars and poets flourished under royal patronage. Many tongues echoed in the city: Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Persian, and even Portuguese. Faith was not only ritual, but thought. Saints and teachers inspired devotion and wisdom. Women of Vijayanagara played important roles in households, in trade, and in the arts. To Paes, Vijayanagara seemed not an Indian city, but a world capital. 7 walls guarded Vijayanagara. Soldiers kept peace, ensuring trade thrived. Beyond Mahanavami, many festivals filled the year. Lights, music, and joy echoed through the empire. Markets were the lifeline of the city, filled every day with voices and colors. Vijayanagara glittered with wealth. Gold and gems passed freely through its markets. Unlike many kingdoms, prosperity here was shared. Common people, too, lived with comfort. For Paes, the journey was more than trade. It was discovery. Though Vijayanagara lies in ruins today, its spirit lives on. In its stones, in its rivers, in its festivals, and in the words of Domingo Paes,